He walked into the bakery with the last few dollars in his pocket. A weary veteran, a loyal dog, and a hunger no meal could ever quiet. Outside, snow fell like silent prayers. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and hope. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder. They come as a warm loaf on a cold morning, a bark that saves a life, a stranger's kindness that opens a forgotten door. What Daniel found that day would rebuild more than a bakery. It would rekindle a town's heart. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment and share this story if you still believe that kindness can light even the coldest winter. The morning light came weak and pale through the snowfall, a slow drift of white that softened the rooftops of North Vale. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and the street lamps still glowed faintly against the gray dawn. Daniel Miller walked down the quiet street with his shoulders hunched inside a heavy brown work jacket patched at the elbows. His boots left deep marks in the snow, each step measured, steady, as if the ground beneath him might disappear if he hurried. Daniel was 48, his face carved by years of sun, wind, and silence. Short, chestnut hair streaked with early silver brushed the collar of his coat, and a faint stubble covered a jaw that had once been strong but now carried the weight of fatigue. His eyes, a soft green-gray, still held the sharpness of a man trained to see danger in ordinary places. Yet this morning, they only reflected a quiet hunger, the kind that wasn't just about food. Beside him walked Buddy, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable and cream coat dusted with snow. His gait was disciplined, smooth, every muscle speaking of alertness and loyalty. His ears flicked at distant sounds, the hum of a truck engine, a door closing, a bird breaking the cold silence. Buddy's amber eyes stayed on Daniel, reading every breath, every small hesitation. He was more than a companion. He was a mirror of Daniel's steadiness, loyal, patient, and wounded in the same invisible way. Daniel's pockets were nearly empty. He had counted the bills twice before leaving the small rented room above the auto shop. Just enough for one loaf of bread and a cup of coffee, if he was lucky. Work had been scarce since the snowstorms began. He had patched fences, fixed pipes, hauled wood, anything to keep going. His right shoulder still ached from a wound that never quite healed, a memory of a place across the ocean where sandstorms replaced snow and noise replaced silence. As they turned the corner, a wooden sign swung gently above a door painted forest green. Hearthlight Bakery. The letters were hand-carved, and a small brass lantern hung beneath, its glass fogged from the warmth inside. Through the window, Daniel saw the orange glow of an oven and the faint silhouette of a woman moving slowly between counters. When he opened the door, a soft bell chimed. The smell of cinnamon, yeast, and roasted nuts rushed to meet him, a scent that made something deep inside him loosen. Heat wrapped around him like a blanket, chasing away the chill. Flour dust shimmered in the sunlight streaming through the front window, floating in the air like slow-falling stars. Behind the counter stood Eliza Harper, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a loose bun. She was small in stature but carried herself with quiet grace. Her face bore the delicate lines of time, not harsh but gentle, the kind drawn by laughter and worry in equal measure. Her eyes were a deep hazel, steady and kind but observant, the kind of eyes that noticed everything without judgment. She wore a dark blue apron smudged with flour and a wool shawl draped around her shoulders. "Cold morning," she greeted, her voice calm yet warm, like a cup of tea on a long day. Daniel nodded. Feels like it's trying to freeze the air itself. Eliza smiled faintly. It's been that kind of winter. Her gaze flicked to Buddy, who stood quietly beside Daniel, his tail resting still on the floor. And who's this fine gentleman? Buddy, Daniel said. He's better at keeping me alive than I am at keeping him fed. Eliza chuckled softly, bending slightly to offer her hand. Buddy sniffed, tail sweeping once before returning to his quiet stance. Well, Buddy, you're welcome here as long as you behave. She turned back to Daniel. What can I get you this morning? Daniel reached into his pocket and laid out the last few crumpled bills. Just one loaf, please. Whatever's fresh. Eliza's eyes flickered to the money, then back to him. There was no pity in her expression, only understanding. You'll want the wheat bread. It's still warm. As she turned toward the oven, a faint cough of smoke escaped from the back vent. The smell of something burning followed. Sharp, sudden. Ah, not again, Eliza muttered, rushing toward the back. The smoke thickened, curling near the ceiling. Daniel moved before thinking. Years of instinct took over. He crossed the kitchen in long, sure strides, grabbed a damp towel from the counter, and covered the vent pipe. Window? He asked. Eliza pointed. Daniel flipped the latch and pushed it open, letting the cold air cut through the haze. Buddy barked once, loud, sharp, then moved toward Daniel's leg, tugging gently at his sleeve. The dog's timing was perfect. Daniel adjusted his angle, shifted the damper lever, and the smoke began to ease. The flames inside the oven steadied, no longer choking for air. For a moment, there was only the sound of the oven breathing again. Eliza pressed a hand to her chest and exhaled. You've done that before. Daniel gave a half smile. A few times. Different kind of fire. Soldier? She asked softly. Once, he said. Now just another man looking for work. Eliza poured a mug of coffee and slid it toward him. Then this one's on the house. For the man who saved my oven. She bent to fill a small bowl with water and placed it on the floor for Buddy. Daniel hesitated, then nodded gratefully. He sat by the window, Buddy curling beside him, head resting on his boots. The steam from the coffee rose in slow spirals, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt the world stop pushing. You remind me of my husband, Eliza said after a moment. He fought in the Korean War, came back quieter than he left. Daniel looked up. Did he ever find peace? She smiled gently. He found work. Sometimes that's the same thing. They shared a quiet moment, the kind that needed no words. When Eliza wrapped the loaf for him, she placed an extra pastry in the bag. For the road, she said. And if you ever need a few hours of work, I could use help moving flour sacks or fixing that stubborn vent. Daniel wanted to refuse, pride rising out of habit, but her tone wasn't charity. It was invitation. I'll come by tomorrow, he said finally. As he and Buddy stepped back into the snow, the cold air met him like a reminder of the world waiting outside. But something inside him had shifted. The bakery light glowed behind him, warm and steady, a beacon against the gray. Buddy looked up at him, ears twitching, eyes filled with something Daniel hadn't felt in a long time. Certainty. He reached down and patted the dog's head. Guess we found more than bread today, huh? Buddy wagged his tail once and pressed against Daniel's leg as they walked away. For the first time in months, Daniel didn't count the steps ahead. He simply followed the sound of his dog's paws in the snow and the faint scent of cinnamon that lingered in the wind like a promise. Snow continued to fall through the night, soft and patient, blanketing North Vale in white silence. By morning, the streets looked untouched, as if no one had ever lived there at all. Daniel Miller returned to Hearthlight Bakery early, his boots dusted with fresh snow and his breath forming pale clouds in the frigid air. Buddy walked beside him, tail low but wagging faintly, his nose lifted to the scent of warm bread that floated out through the bakery's chimney like a trail of comfort in a cold world. Inside, the bakery was alive again. The lamps glowed gold, and the ovens hummed gently. Eliza Harper stood by the counter kneading dough, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, flour softening the creases of her hands. She looked up as Daniel entered, a quiet smile forming as though she had been expecting him. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, wiping her hands on a linen towel. "You're right on time. I made sure the vent stayed quiet after your fix yesterday." Daniel nodded slightly, glancing toward the stove. "You've got good heat now. That oven should last another winter." Eliza poured him a cup of coffee and nodded toward the small table near the window. "Then sit a moment before we start. You look like you fought the storm itself." He smiled faintly and took the cup. "Feels like the storm won." Eliza laughed softly, her eyes creasing at the corners. "That's the thing about storms. They win for a day, but people win for a lifetime." Buddy lay near the counter, his body forming a guard line between Daniel and the front door. The dog's coat shimmered under the lamplight, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He had already memorized the smell of this place: cinnamon, wood, and warmth. When Eliza passed him, he wagged his tail once, polite, restrained, as if already claiming his duty here. By noon, the bakery filled with its usual small flow of customers. There was Mrs. Palmer, a round woman in her early 50s with a bright scarf and rosy cheeks, who bought 2 loaves each morning and asked too many questions with motherly concern. There was Jacob Weller, a wiry postman in his 30s with red hair and a constant sniffle from the cold. Always in a hurry, but never too hurried to scratch Buddy behind the ears. Daniel quietly helped Eliza lift flour sacks, wipe counters, and carry trays from the back room. He didn't talk much, but the quiet between them felt easy, like a rhythm that didn't need music. Later that day, when the shop closed, Eliza led Daniel up a narrow wooden staircase tucked behind a curtain near the pantry. The steps creaked with age, and the smell of cedar filled the air. "This attic hasn't been used in a while," she said, holding a small lamp that cast warm circles of light along the beams. "It's simple, but it's warm enough. I'd feel better knowing you and that dog aren't out in the cold." The attic room was small, with slanted ceilings and a single frosted window facing the street. A metal bed stood near the wall, a thick wool blanket folded neatly on top. There was a crate for a nightstand and a small iron stove in the corner, faintly rusted but solid. Daniel stood for a moment, taking it in. "It's more than I deserve," he said quietly. Eliza turned to him, her expression gentle but firm. "Don't say that. No one deserves the cold, Daniel. Least of all someone who knows how to fight it." He looked down, running his fingers along the worn wooden frame of the bed. Years of surviving had taught him not to accept kindness easily. Every time someone offered help, it felt like a debt waiting to be paid. But Eliza's tone held no debt, only the kind of care that came from faith rather than charity. Buddy circled the small space once before settling at the top of the stairs, his body forming a silent barrier. He placed his chin on his paws, eyes half closed but alert, as if ready to guard the doorway against the cold itself. Eliza watched them both and smiled. "He's a good guardian." Daniel nodded. "He was trained for search and rescue back when I served. He doesn't know how to stop protecting." "Neither do you, I think," she said quietly, then placed the lamp on the crate beside the bed. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper will be ready in an hour. Stew and bread." After she left, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. They were rough, scarred in places, strong enough to build or break. He wondered when they had last felt they belonged somewhere. The ticking of the old wall clock downstairs echoed faintly through the floorboards, steady and human. Buddy shifted and gave a low rumble in his throat. Not a growl, just the sound he made when he sensed Daniel thinking too hard. "You're right," Daniel murmured, glancing down. "We've been ghosts long enough." The dog raised his head, eyes gleaming in the dim light, tail sweeping once. Daniel leaned back against the wall and let the quiet fill him. He could smell stew cooking below, mixed with the faint sweetness of cooling bread. It reminded him of something he hadn't let himself feel in years: safety. Later that night, Eliza knocked softly at the attic door and brought him a tray with a bowl of stew and 2 thick slices of bread. "You'll need strength for the morning," she said. "Tomorrow's a big baking day." Daniel took the tray. His gratitude caught somewhere between his throat and his chest. "I can start early. You shouldn't be lifting those sacks yourself." "I've managed worse," she said with a wink. Then her tone softened. "But I'd be glad for the help." As she turned to leave, Daniel spoke before he could stop himself. "Eliza." She paused at the stairway, looking back. "I'll stay through the winter," he said, "if you'll have me." Her smile came slow and sure. "That's the best offer I've had all season." When she was gone, Daniel ate slowly, savoring every bite. Buddy inched closer, resting his head on Daniel's knee. Outside, snow began to fall again, tapping softly against the window pane. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel like a stranger passing through someone else's story. He felt like he had stepped into one meant for him, a quiet corner of the world where second chances rose like bread in a warm oven. The next morning came gray and quiet, the kind of day when the light never quite decided to arrive. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold bit harder than before. Inside Hearthlight Bakery, the ovens hummed low, filling the air with a steady rhythm of warmth and life. Daniel Miller stood behind the counter dusting flour from his forearms, sleeves rolled up, his breath faintly visible near the drafty window. The smell of rising dough surrounded him, earthy and sweet. Eliza Harper worked near the back, shaping loaves with careful precision. Though her hands trembled slightly from age, her movements were steady, her mind sharp. She hummed softly, an old tune Daniel didn't recognize but found comforting. The day had started like any other, quiet and ordinary, until Buddy started acting differently. The German Shepherd had been lying by the pantry door, his head resting on his paws, half dozing in the warmth. But suddenly, his ears perked up. He lifted his head, nose twitching as if catching a scent hidden beneath the wooden floor. His amber eyes followed something invisible. Then, without hesitation, he rose and padded toward the center of the room. His claws clicked lightly on the planks as he sniffed and circled once before tapping one specific spot with his paw. Daniel watched, brow furrowing. "What is it, boy?" Buddy pressed his paw again, this time with insistence, claws scraping softly against the grain. Then he looked up at Daniel and let out a short, low bark, not loud, but deliberate. Eliza turned from the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's found a mouse, maybe," she said, smiling, though curiosity softened her tone. Daniel knelt beside the dog, his fingers brushing across the wooden plank. It was slightly darker than the others, and when he tapped it, a hollow sound echoed beneath. "Not a mouse," he murmured. "There's space under here." He stood and looked around for something flat and sturdy. On a nearby shelf, an old butter knife caught his eye. He crouched again, wedged the blade into the seam, and lifted gently. The plank shifted with a faint creak, releasing a puff of dust that smelled of cedar and thyme. Buddy backed a step, tail flicking once as if bracing for discovery. Beneath the board lay a small wooden box about the length of Daniel's forearm. The surface was smooth but worn, its edges darkened from years hidden away. Eliza moved closer, her eyes narrowing. "Good heavens," she whispered. "That's been under there since before I was born." Daniel lifted it carefully and placed it on the table. The hinges were tarnished but intact. When he opened it, the smell of old paper and oil filled the air. Inside rested 3 items: a slim leather-bound notebook, a ring of iron keys aged to a dull gray, and a folded slip of brown paper tied with a thin ribbon. Eliza reached out with trembling fingers and touched the notebook's cover. "My grandfather kept something like this," she said softly. "He ran this bakery when it was first built, back when the town nearly froze one winter. People said his bread saved lives." Daniel opened the notebook gently. The pages were filled with spidery handwriting, measurements, notes, symbols, and small flower smudges along the corners. At the bottom of one page, faint words caught the light. "Whoever keeps the fire shares the warmth," Daniel read aloud. Eliza exhaled, emotion flickering behind her calm. "The keeper's code," she said after a moment. "He used to speak of it when I was a girl. Said this bakery wasn't just for business. It was a promise that no one in North Vale should go hungry in winter." Daniel turned the next page. More recipes, more symbols, some marked with small stars, others with notes written in shorthand. The iron keys rattled faintly as the box shifted. Buddy sniffed them and gave a low chuff, tail moving once as if sensing their importance. "What about the paper?" Eliza asked. Daniel untied the ribbon and unfolded it. The ink was faded but still legible. "To the one who finds this," it began, "the oven is more than stone, and bread is more than food. In every winter there will be one who carries the warmth forward. Guard the hearth. Share what you can. The town endures when its fire is kept." For a long moment neither spoke. The air in the bakery felt different, heavier, sacred somehow. Outside, a wind pushed against the windows, rattling them softly, as though the town itself was listening. Eliza touched the page gently, her voice quiet but steady. "My grandfather, Thomas Whitlow, he built this place with his own hands. During the blizzard of '38, the whole town came here when the church lost power. He baked through the night using the last of the wood. Said warmth was a kind of faith." Daniel closed the box slowly, his hands lingering on the lid. "He left this for someone to find," he said. "Maybe he knew the world would need it again." Eliza looked up at him, her hazel eyes shimmering. "Then perhaps it found the right hands." Daniel said nothing, but inside him something shifted. He had lived through winters far worse, sandstorms, hunger, and the endless noise of war. Yet this discovery made his chest ache in a new way. Not pain exactly, more like remembrance. He had seen too many places burn, too many lives reduced to ash. The thought that a single oven, a single act of kindness, could outlast all that felt almost impossible. And yet, here it was, proof written in flour and ink. Buddy rested his head on Daniel's boot, tail sweeping slowly, content. The dog's presence grounded him, as if reminding him that some loyalties don't fade with time. Eliza carried the box to a small shelf behind the counter and set it there carefully. "Your buddy has a nose for history," she said with a smile. Daniel nodded. Or maybe for purpose. When the day ended and the lamps were dimmed, Daniel lingered by the oven. The faint crackle of cooling stone filled the silence. He placed his hand on the oven door, feeling the leftover warmth beneath the metal. Maybe this was what his life had been waiting for. Not another mission, not another battlefield, but a place where warmth could be rebuilt from ashes. Upstairs, the attic waited. Buddy climbed halfway before turning to look back at him, eyes glowing amber in the half-light. Daniel gave a quiet nod, a promise unspoken but understood. They would guard this place, not as soldiers, but as keepers of something far older than war. The week after the discovery passed in a hush of snow and steam. Each morning, Daniel arrived before sunrise to help Eliza, his hands already dusted with flour before the sky turned pale. The bakery became a rhythm: knead, bake, serve, rest. And within that rhythm, Daniel found a strange calm. The smell of bread filled the air like memory itself, thick and familiar. Buddy watched everything, lying by the back door like a sentry carved from loyalty and fur, but change, like the wind, always found a way in. It began with the sound of tires crunching over packed snow outside. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, too new for North Vale's weathered charm. The door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, perfectly dressed in a gray wool coat that seemed allergic to dust. His leather gloves gleamed, and a thin silver watch flashed when he checked the time. His face was angular, smooth, and well-kept, but his eyes, sharp blue and restless, carried the cold precision of someone who measured everything in profit and loss. He entered the bakery with a smile that felt rehearsed. "Mrs. Harper," he said, removing his gloves slowly. His voice was smooth, low, calculated to sound sincere. "I'm Travis Cole. You may have received my letter." Eliza straightened from behind the counter, her expression polite but cautious. "I received many letters, Mr. Cole. Which one was yours?" "The one offering you an opportunity," he replied. "A chance to rest from the burden of this old place and retire with comfort. My company plans to develop a shopping plaza on this street. Hearthlight Bakery would make a perfect anchor spot." Daniel stood by the work table, arms crossed, saying nothing. His instincts stirred. Something about the man's voice was too smooth, too familiar in its emptiness. He'd met that tone before, from people who smiled before taking what they wanted. But he rose quietly, tail stiff but low, his eyes fixed on Travis. Travis noticed. "Well-trained dog," he remarked. "Military, I presume." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "Better trained than most men." Travis smiled thinly. "I can see that." He turned back to Eliza. "I understand this building is old. Repairs must be constant. Leaky pipes, unpredictable vents, electrical issues. none of which fit with the modern standards of safety. Wouldn't you agree? Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly. Everything here still works fine. Sometimes things need tending, that's all. Travis slipped a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the counter. I can offer you 3 times the property value, enough to live comfortably anywhere you wish. No more cold mornings, no more heavy lifting. I'll need an answer by the end of next week. Daniel caught the flicker of uncertainty in Eliza's expression. She was proud, but the offer wasn't small. Travis saw it too, pressing his advantage. Time is crucial, Mrs. Harper. The town council is reviewing zoning requests soon. If you wait too long, your choice might be taken out of your hands. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza drew in a slow breath. Mr. Cole, I built this bakery on my father's foundation, and he on his father's. We've seen floods, storms, and blackouts, but never once did we sell warmth for convenience. Travis's smile didn't fade, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I respect tradition, truly, but sentiment rarely pays the bills. Do consider it, won't you? He placed a sleek business card on the counter and turned to leave. And if anything breaks again, pipes, wiring, vents, my team would be happy to handle the inspection. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped out. For a long moment, only the hum of the ovens filled the silence. Then Daniel moved to the window, watching the car glide away through the snow. He didn't come here just to make an offer, he said. Eliza nodded slowly. No. He came to make a promise he hopes I'll be too tired to refuse. That evening, Daniel stayed late to check the wiring near the back door. The lights had been flickering more often lately, and the oven vent had started making strange noises again. He crouched with a flashlight, tracing the wires that ran along the wall. Near the baseboard, he found a section that had been deliberately loosened. Not worn, not accidental. Someone had tampered with it. Buddy, lying nearby, lifted his head and let out a low growl. His ears twitched toward the back entrance. The dog stood, sniffing the air, tail stiffening. Daniel followed his gaze to the narrow doorway that led outside to the alley. He opened the door carefully. Cold air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of engine oil and cigarette smoke. Footprints marked the snow, large, heavy, and fresh. Whoever had been there had left minutes ago. Buddy sniffed the tracks, snorted, then looked back at Daniel, ears pricked. Yeah, Daniel said quietly. I smell it too. The next morning, the street felt different. The usual chatter of the neighbors, Mrs. Palmer sweeping her porch, Jacob Weller whistling as he passed, was gone. Curtains stayed drawn. People moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. Daniel noticed 2 men he didn't recognize standing across the street, bundled in heavy coats, pretending to read newspapers. They had the look of construction contractors, but their posture was too rigid, too alert. Inside, Eliza tried to keep her voice steady. Word spreads fast in a small town. Some think selling would bring new jobs. Others know better but are afraid to speak up. Daniel kneaded dough in silence, his hands steady but his mind restless. He'd seen this pattern before, soft pressure before hard force. The kind that didn't come from storms, but from greed disguised as progress. Buddy lay near the back again, ears angled toward the door. Every few minutes, he'd lift his head and stare into nothing, sensing something Daniel couldn't yet see. That night, Daniel checked every lock twice before heading upstairs. The attic felt warmer than usual, the air heavy with heat from the ovens below. Buddy settled at his usual place by the stairs, but even as he drifted toward sleep, one ear remained upright. Outside, a car engine idled briefly in the distance, then faded away. Daniel lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, the old words echoing in his mind. Whoever keeps the fire shares the warmth. He had no intention of letting anyone extinguish that flame, not while he and Buddy were here. Night settled over North Vale like a heavy quilt, muffling the sound of the wind outside. Inside the Hearthlight Bakery, the ovens had cooled to a soft glow, their warmth seeping through the floorboards and filling the building with the scent of baked wheat and ash. Daniel Miller sat at the wooden table near the back, sleeves rolled, repairing a broken drawer handle. Beside him, Buddy lay stretched out, his thick coat rising and falling with steady breaths. The dog's tail twitched every few moments, as if he were dreaming of running through snow. Eliza had retired early, exhausted after a long day of baking. Daniel enjoyed the quiet. The bakery after hours felt different, peaceful, almost sacred. The ticking of the clock mixed with the faint creak of the rafters, and for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine this peace lasting. But Buddy's sudden movement broke the stillness. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears pointing toward the back wall. His body stiffened, eyes alert, nostrils flaring as he caught something unseen. Daniel looked up immediately. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Buddy rose, tail straight, paws silent on the wooden floor. He moved toward the old brick wall near the storage shelves. His nose brushed along the mortar lines, and he gave a quiet whine before tapping his paw against the base of the wall. Daniel followed, running his hand along the bricks. They were rough and cold, but in one spot, the mortar looked newer, slightly darker than the rest. He crouched, pressing his fingers into the seam. A faint draft of air slipped through. His instincts stirred, the kind that never really left a soldier. "Something behind here," he murmured. He grabbed a small chisel from the workbench and began prying at the edge. The brick gave way slowly, grating against old dust. Buddy stayed close, head tilted, watching intently. After a few minutes of steady work, Daniel removed enough bricks to reveal a narrow opening, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Cold, damp air flowed out, carrying the smell of stone and time. He found a lantern, lit it, and crouched to look inside. A short stone staircase led downward, disappearing into shadow. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Buddy. "You first?" The dog wagged his tail once, then stepped forward carefully, paws landing on the first step without fear. Daniel followed, the lantern casting shifting light across the walls. The cellar was small but deep, built from old stone and reinforced with wooden beams darkened by age. Shelves lined one side, covered in dust. Mason jars filled with dried goods sat forgotten, their labels faded to ghosts. An old iron kettle rested near the corner, rusted but still intact. Buddy sniffed around, tail sweeping slowly, until he stopped near a wooden crate. He gave a soft bark, pawing lightly. Daniel knelt and brushed away the dust. On the lid, carved faintly into the wood, was a symbol, a small lantern surrounded by sheaves of wheat. He opened the crate. Inside lay a thick ledger wrapped in burlap, its leather cover cracked but still strong. He carried it to a workbench and set it under the lantern light. The first page was written in fine, looping script, dated 1919. "Record of winter relief," it read. Beneath, names filled the lines in careful ink, families, addresses, numbers of loaves, jars of soup, even notes about children and the elderly. Daniel turned the pages slowly. Each section spanned a winter season, 1926, 1934, 1952. The handwriting changed through the decades, but the purpose never did. The last few pages were blank, waiting. Eliza's voice came from behind him, gentle but startled. "Daniel, what on earth?" He turned. She stood in her nightrobe, gray hair loose around her shoulders, a shawl wrapped tightly against the chill. Her expression shifted from confusion to reverence as she saw the ledger. "That's my grandfather's record book." She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as they brushed the edge of the page. He wrote every name by hand, every loaf given to a family in need. He said the bread wasn't ours to keep, only to pass along. Daniel nodded slowly. "There's still space left," he said. "Enough to keep the list going." Eliza smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Then maybe it's time we used it again." They sat together at the workbench, the old lantern flickering between them. Eliza traced her finger down one of the oldest entries. Mary Ellis. 3 children. Their home burned during the storm of '42. My grandfather baked all night to feed them. Daniel flipped a few more pages. "He kept this up every year?" "Every winter," she said, "until he passed. Then my father continued, though the town grew, and people started buying more than sharing. Eventually, the ledger was lost, or maybe hidden, waiting for the right hands." Buddy rested beside them, chin on his paws, tail thumping softly. Daniel reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Seems like your nose is good for more than trouble, huh?" Eliza chuckled quietly. "I think your dog might have a better sense of purpose than most of us." Daniel smiled, though a hint of sadness touched his face. "He used to work with me overseas, found people trapped under rubble, collapsed walls, explosions. Guess he still thinks that's his job, finding what's been buried." The lantern flickered. The cellar felt warmer somehow, though the air remained cold. It wasn't heat from fire, but the kind that came from understanding, from uncovering something worth keeping. Eliza looked at him, her tone turning thoughtful. "You know, Daniel, maybe this bakery wasn't just meant to make bread. Maybe it was meant to keep hearts from freezing." Daniel closed the book gently, dust rising like breath. "Then we keep it alive," he said. Eliza nodded. "We will. Tomorrow we'll bake extra. There's an old man down on Ash Street, Mr. Parker. He hasn't come by in weeks, and the Thompsons lost work when the mill closed. We'll start with them." Daniel stood, the decision feeling heavier and truer than any order he'd ever followed. "I'll fix the door locks first thing. Don't want uninvited guests finding this place." Eliza smiled, her eyes tired but bright. "You mean Travis Cole?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. As they climbed the stairs, Buddy paused and looked back into the cellar, tail swaying once, as if saying goodbye to the ghosts below. The lantern's flame flickered, then steadied. Upstairs, the bakery was dark except for the faint orange glow from the oven's embers. Daniel looked around, at the worn tables, the shelves of flour, the tiny cracks in the wall. Everything here was old, imperfect, but alive. He glanced at Buddy. "You did good tonight," he whispered. The dog pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Outside, snow began to fall again, whispering against the window panes. The world might keep turning cold, Daniel thought, but as long as they kept baking, There would be light in this corner of it. Snow fell again that night, heavy and soundless, wrapping the streets of North Vale in white silence. The Hearthlight Bakery glowed like a lantern in the storm, its chimney sending up a thin trail of smoke. Inside, Daniel Miller worked quietly, the sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled up, his hands dusted with flour. The ovens hummed low, their orange light painting warm strokes across the walls. Buddy lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, but his amber eyes open, ever watchful. It had been nearly a week since they found the old ledger in the cellar. Every evening, Daniel and Eliza baked extra loaves, marking down names of those who needed them most. The Parker house, the Thompsons, and a few elderly couples whose lights rarely came on after dark. The bakery had begun to feel alive again, its warmth spreading beyond its walls. But in small towns, good news never traveled alone. A faint noise broke Daniel's concentration. A soft scrape, metal on stone, coming from the back near the oven vent. Buddy's head shot up. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring. He gave a low rumble in his throat, deep and controlled. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered. Buddy stood, tail stiff, and walked toward the back door. His paw pressed lightly against Daniel's leg, tugging at his sleeve in that insistent way only a working dog could manage. Daniel grabbed the lantern and followed. The back corridor smelled faintly of oil, wrong for a bakery. Buddy moved straight to the wall behind the main oven, sniffing and pawing near the metal vent pipe. Daniel crouched and held the lantern close. Behind the pipe, wedged between the stone and the wall, was a small bundle wrapped in burlap. He reached in and pulled it free. The fabric was damp and smelled sharply of kerosene. Inside were rags soaked in oil, packed tightly. A crude attempt to choke the airflow and create smoke. Buddy barked once, sharp and urgent. "Good eyes," Daniel muttered, carrying the bundle to the sink. He turned on the faucet, dousing the rags under cold water until the smell faded. Steam hissed faintly where the oil met the heat. When he turned back, Buddy was sniffing the floor again. Something small and metallic lay half hidden near the wall, a rectangular tag. Daniel picked it up and turned it under the light. It was a company access badge, the kind used for building crews or maintenance teams. The logo stamped on it was clean and unmistakable, Cole Development Group. Daniel exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "So it's not just talk anymore," he said quietly. By morning, the story had spread like wind through dry pine. People whispered as they passed, unsure of what to believe. Some said it was an accident. Others, more quietly, suspected otherwise. Around mid-morning, 2 men arrived at the bakery. Both wore matching gray coats with the Cole Development emblem stitched on the sleeve. One was tall and pale, his hair combed back so tight it looked wet, eyes hidden behind clear glasses. The other was shorter, stockier, his hands rough and red from the cold. The tall one spoke first, his tone flat and practiced. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Daniel Price from Cole Development Maintenance Division. We're here to inspect the vent system after the disturbance last night." Eliza stood behind the counter, her posture straight but her voice calm. "Disturbance? You mean the sabotage your employer caused?" The shorter man shifted uncomfortably, but Price's expression didn't change. "Our company has no involvement in any alleged tampering. However, Mr. Cole has sent a building inspector from the county to ensure safety compliance. He'll be here shortly." Daniel, standing behind the counter, met Price's gaze. "You mean you called the inspector yourselves?" Price gave a thin smile, We're simply concerned citizens, Mr. Miller. No one wants a fire hazard in the neighborhood. Buddy, sensing tension, let out a low growl that vibrated through the room. The stocky man took a step back. Price's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Daniel. You might want to keep that animal under control, he said softly. Daniel didn't move. He's under control. You might want to worry about the people who aren't. Before anything more could be said, the bell above the door rang. A new man entered, brushing snow from his coat. He was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with a ruddy face and wire-rimmed glasses. His name tag read, Gregory Lane, County Building Inspector. His brown hair was thinning at the top, and his smile was polite but tired. The kind of man who'd seen too many small-town disputes to take sides easily. Morning, folks, Gregory said, setting down his clipboard. Heard there was some trouble with the vent system? Eliza nodded. You could say that. Gregory moved around the kitchen, examining the pipes and oven. His manner was methodical but gentle, like a teacher correcting a student's work rather than an enforcer. These ovens are old, but solid, he said. Built better than most of the new ones, to be honest. He paused, then sniffed faintly. Though I do smell kerosene residue. Someone's been fooling around where they shouldn't. Price opened his mouth, but Gregory cut him off. You work for coal development, don't you? I've seen your trucks at half the town's construction sites. Maybe stick to drywall and leave history alone. Eliza smiled faintly, then walked to the front counter and retrieved a folder. She opened it and laid out several aged documents, yellowed pages with seals and signatures. This bakery is listed as a protected heritage site under North Vale's Preservation Act, she said. Built in 1919 by my grandfather, Thomas Whitlow. I suggest you tell Mr. Cole that any interference here is a violation of local law. Gregory examined the papers, nodded approvingly, and tucked them back into the folder. Well then, he said, that settles that. Price's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned briskly toward the door, his partner following close behind. This isn't over, Mrs. Harper, he said quietly. Eliza's voice stayed steady. You're right, it isn't. After they left, the bakery was quiet again. Gregory lingered a moment longer, scribbling notes on his clipboard. For what it's worth, I'm glad someone's still keeping the fire going, he said. Most towns forget what they're built on. Daniel shook his hand. Thank you for coming. Gregory smiled. Just doing my job, but maybe check your locks tonight. Men like Cole don't like losing twice. That evening, Daniel climbed onto the roof with a toolbox. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he adjusted the vent and reinforced the cover with new brackets. He worked until his fingers stung from cold. When he was done, the smoke from the oven rose cleanly again, straight and steady. Below, Buddy barked once from the doorway, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Eliza stepped outside, her wool shawl pulled tight. It's working perfectly, she said. Daniel nodded, wiping sweat and snow from his brow. It'll hold. Eliza smiled softly. Good, because tomorrow the whole street's invited. We'll show them this oven still breathes. The next afternoon, townsfolk gathered to watch as fresh bread came out of the glowing oven. Daniel handed out slices, steam rising like a promise into the winter air. Buddy sat proudly beside the counter, tail wagging slowly. The vent stayed silent. The fire burned bright. And for the first time in a long while, North Vale's street smelled not of fear, but of home. By late January, the storms began to ease, giving North Vale a rare stretch of calm. The snow still covered the rooftops like frosting, but the sun returned, soft and gold through the winter haze. The townsfolk called it the Week of the Snowlight Festival, a small celebration held every winter to remind themselves that light could still survive the cold. Lanterns hung from lampposts, ribbons of white and silver fluttered across the street, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. For the first time in years, Hearthlight Bakery stood at the center of it all. Daniel Miller and Eliza Harper had spent 3 days preparing hundreds of loaves, cinnamon, rye, honey wheat, and arranged them on long wooden tables under a sign that read, "If you need warmth, take one." The letters were painted in Eliza's neat handwriting, surrounded by little snowflake drawings made by children from the neighborhood. Eliza looked out at the street, wrapped in her wool coat and scarf, her cheeks red from the cold. "My father used to say the snowlight was more than a festival," she said. "He said it was a promise, that the town would always share its fire, no matter how small the flame." Daniel smiled faintly, brushing flour from his jacket. "Then let's make sure it burns brighter than ever." Buddy sat beside the table, tail curled neatly around his paws, his thick sable coat catching the light from the hanging lanterns. He had a small red ribbon tied around his neck, a gift from one of the neighborhood kids. But his expression was serious, his gaze constantly scanning the crowd. Old instincts never left him, the square filled with people. Mrs. Palmer arrived with her husband, her scarf bright green this time, carrying a thermos of cocoa for anyone who wanted it. Jacob Weller, the red-haired postman, helped set up a barrel fire to keep the elderly warm. Laughter spread through the air, mingled with the sound of fiddles and the smell of roasted chestnuts. Among the crowd, Daniel noticed Sheriff Raymond Carter, a man in his early 50s with a broad build and a gray mustache. His face was weathered, but his eyes held that steady calm of someone who'd seen too much and still chose kindness over cynicism. He stopped by the table and nodded to Daniel. "Heard you've had trouble lately," he said. "Nothing we can't handle," Daniel replied, offering him a slice of bread. The sheriff accepted it, chewing thoughtfully. "Keep your eyes open. Cole's been pushing hard again. Some of his construction boys were seen near the creek road last night. Said they were checking ground stability. I told them to check their permits instead." Daniel gave a slow nod. "I'll watch our end." The day passed in a glow of laughter and music. Children built small snowmen near the fountain. Old couples sat on benches sipping cocoa. The bakery's loaves disappeared faster than Daniel could refill them. But as the sun began to sink, painting the snow with pink and amber hues, Buddy's calm demeanor changed. He stood suddenly, ears erect, body stiff. His eyes locked on the wooden bridge at the edge of the square, the one that crossed a narrow creek just behind the marketplace. Daniel followed his gaze. "What is it, boy?" Buddy didn't move. He growled low, a warning rumble that vibrated in his chest. Daniel excused himself, picked up a flashlight, and walked toward the bridge. The crowd was thinning now, the music fading into gentle chatter. The bridge creaked softly under his boots. It had stood for decades. Old pine beams, reinforced over the years, but still weathered by snow and time. Daniel crouched near the first support beam, the wood damp but solid. Then something metallic caught the light. Wedged against the inner beam was a small rectangular device, no bigger than a book, wired to a vibrating mechanism. Daniel recognized the design from his military days. It wasn't explosive, but it could cause structural weakening if left running long enough. He exhaled sharply, glancing around. Buddy barked once from the other side, tail stiff, warning echoing through the cold air. Daniel worked quickly, pulling a screwdriver from his pocket and prying at the device. The vibration hummed faintly, shaking the wooden joint. After a few tense minutes, he disconnected the battery and threw the unit into the snow. Silence returned. He checked the beam again. Still stable. Someone had tried to sabotage it, and not by accident. He walked back to the square, wiping his hands on his coat. Eliza met him halfway, concern in her eyes. "Daniel, what happened?" "Someone's been working under the bridge," he said quietly. "A vibration rig. Small, but enough to make the wood give way after a day or two. Maybe cause a safety hazard near your bakery." Eliza's lips tightened. "Cole's people." Daniel nodded. "Most likely, but we've got proof this time." As if on cue, Sheriff Carter approached, holding his phone. "One of the festival volunteers caught something on the community camera by the bridge," he said. "Two men in gray coats working there after midnight last night. You'll never guess whose trucks they drove." Eliza exchanged a look with Daniel. "Cole Development." The sheriff grunted. "That's right. I'll be taking this straight to the council meeting on Monday. Folks around here have had enough." The next morning, the entire town gathered at the square again. The news had spread overnight, not the sabotage itself, but the unity that followed. People signed a petition drafted by the sheriff to protect Hearthlight Bakery and the surrounding street as a local heritage zone. Even those who had once considered selling their properties changed their minds. Mrs. Palmer stood at the front of the line, signing her name with a flourish. "We can't let some outsider tear down the only place that still smells like home," she declared. Jacob Weller nodded beside her. "And besides, if we lose the bakery, where else am I going to get Eliza's cinnamon bread?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel stood a few steps away, watching the scene quietly. He felt something he hadn't in years: belonging. The kind that didn't come from blood or battle, but from trust, built loaf by loaf. Buddy sat beside him, tail wagging softly, his eyes following the townsfolk as if he too understood the moment. Eliza came up beside Daniel, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "You think they'll leave us alone now?" Daniel looked toward the distant hills, where the Cole development site sat under tarps and scaffolding. "Men like Cole don't quit easily," he said, "but neither do we." Buddy nudged his hand, pressing close. Daniel smiled faintly. "We'll keep the fire burning, won't we, boy?" The dog barked once, firm, clear, a promise echoing through the quiet street. And as the lanterns from the festival swayed gently in the morning breeze, their golden light reflected in the bakery's windows, like 100 tiny flames refusing to go out, the day of the town meeting arrived under a calm, silver sky. Snow dusted the eaves of North Vale's town hall, and the frozen lake glimmered faintly behind it like a mirror to the morning light. Inside, the wooden benches were filled with townsfolk, bakers, shopkeepers, retired miners, and children sitting on their parents' laps. The air smelled of wool coats, coffee, and anticipation. It wasn't often that this many people showed up for a town meeting, but today was different. Today was about justice and the heart of their community, the Hearthlight Bakery. At the front sat the council members, 5 of them, their faces lined with both age and responsibility. At the center, Mayor Ellen Grayson presided. She was a woman in her 60s, tall and lean, with sharp gray eyes and short silver hair that gave her a sense of authority without arrogance. Her voice was even but warm, and she had earned the town's respect years ago after leading flood recovery efforts when most had lost hope. Beside her was Sheriff Raymond Carter, arms folded, his uniform crisp, his expression steady but alert. To his left sat Gregory Lane, the building inspector who had returned voluntarily to testify. He looked uneasy under the council lights, though his integrity showed in every careful word he spoke. Eliza Harper sat at the front row beside Daniel Miller, her posture proud but humble, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders. Buddy lay at her feet, calm but alert, head resting between his paws. The German shepherd had been brushed and looked almost ceremonial, a silent guardian of truth. The session began with Mayor Grayson tapping her gavel gently. This meeting of the North Vale Town Council is now in session. We are here to review the case regarding property damage, public safety threats, and interference in the Heritage District concerning Hearthlight Bakery. The murmurs quieted. Sheriff Carter stood, holding a folder thick with papers and printed photos. Madam Mayor, the department has reviewed surveillance footage from the Snowlight Festival. As shown in Exhibit A, 2 individuals employed by Cole Development were recorded placing a vibration device on the bridge near the festival grounds. The intent was structural sabotage. Both men were on payroll under the authorization of Mr. Travis Cole. Whispers rippled through the hall. In the back row, a few townsfolk muttered disbelievingly. The mayor raised a hand for silence. "Proceed, Sheriff." Carter nodded. "We also recovered an access badge from an earlier incident at the bakery vent, which traces to the same company. Mr. Cole was informed of these findings last week, but failed to attend the preliminary interview." At that cue, the door opened sharply. Travis Cole entered. He cut an elegant but brittle figure in his dark wool coat, scarf draped neatly, his black hair slicked back to perfection. But his face, usually composed, bore faint cracks of exhaustion and pride. His pale blue eyes swept the room like a man trying to regain control of a story slipping away from him. He was accompanied by his attorney, a thin man in a charcoal suit named Philip Marston, who adjusted his tie nervously. "Madam Mayor," Cole began smoothly, "before anyone paints me as a villain, let me remind this council that I've brought hundreds of jobs to this town. My company revitalized your riverfront and funded half the school renovations." Eliza's soft voice cut through, steady and clear, and tried to burn down a bakery that feeds people for free. The hall fell silent again. Even Cole's lawyer hesitated before speaking. "There is no proof, my client," Gregory Lane interrupted gently but firmly. "There's plenty of proof. The inspection logs, the residue samples, and the badge recovered from the bakery site. You can claim coincidence once, not twice." Cole's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than words. Mayor Grayson looked at the council. "The evidence is sufficient. Pending further investigation, all coal development projects are suspended until the county review is complete." A wave of applause filled the hall, breaking the tension. People clapped, some even stood. Buddy barked once, tail thumping against the floor as if echoing the verdict. When quiet returned, the mayor continued. "Now, there's one more matter, the bakery itself. The Hearthlight Bakery has long served this town. not only as a business but as a place of refuge. We have reviewed documentation provided by Mrs. Harper, showing continuous operation since 1919. Under North Vale's Historical Preservation Charter, the Council officially designates Hearthlight Bakery as a protected heritage site. Eliza covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The room erupted in cheers. Daniel sat beside her, smiling quietly, feeling the weight lift off his chest like the last shovelful of snow from a rooftop. Mayor Grayson turned to Daniel. "Mr. Miller, the council has also reviewed your military service record and the letter of recommendation for Mrs. Harper. Based on the bakery's founding decree, we reinstate the honorary title of Keeper of the Hearth. As Mrs. Harper wishes to remain owner but step back from daily operations, we appoint you as the acting steward for the coming season." Daniel stood slowly. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from disbelief. "Madam Mayor," he said, his voice low but firm, "I only did what anyone would have done. This place, it healed more than just me." Grayson smiled. "That's exactly why it's yours to keep." After the gavel came down one last time, the crowd gathered around them, shaking hands, offering congratulations. Children reached down to pet Buddy, who soaked in the attention like a hero unaware of his own fame. Sheriff Carter clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You've done good, soldier," he said, "and you didn't even need a uniform this time." Daniel chuckled softly. Guess bread's stronger than bullets after all. By the next morning, news spread through every corner of town. People arrived at the bakery not just to buy bread, but to offer help. Volunteers painted the window frames, replaced the old sign, and set up a small wooden donation box by the counter labeled the Warm Bread Fund, proceeds to provide free loaves for anyone struggling during winter. Eliza oversaw everything with that quiet pride of someone who had carried hope through too many storms. On the first morning of the new season, Daniel fired up the ovens before dawn. The glow from the coals filled the room like sunrise. The smell of rising dough filled the air, mingling with wood and warmth. Buddy lay near the oven door, watching the flames dance. His eyes caught the light, amber and alive. By midday, people began lining up outside. Children clutching coins, old men leaning on canes, young families holding hands. The bakery door stayed open despite the cold, letting the warmth spill into the street. Eliza handed out loaves while Daniel and the volunteers packed baskets for delivery. As snow began to fall again, Daniel stepped outside to look at the crowd. Lanterns glowed through the flurries, laughter carried on the air, and the sign above the door, Hearthlight Bakery, seemed to shimmer like a beacon. He looked down at Buddy, who pressed close, tail wagging softly. "Looks like we're home for good," Daniel said quietly. The dog barked once, eyes bright as if agreeing. Inside, the ovens roared gently, the smell of bread wrapping around the town like a promise. And in that golden light, North Vale felt smaller, closer, kinder, bound by one man's courage, one woman's faith, and one dog's unwavering loyalty. In a small town blanketed by snow, one veteran and his loyal dog reminded everyone that kindness can still feed the soul. The Hearthlight Bakery became more than a place for bread. It became a home where faith, courage, and compassion rose together like warm loaves from an old oven. Daniel, Eliza, and Buddy showed that no matter how cold the world becomes, a single act of love can ignite 1,000 more. It is proof that miracles still live among us, not in thunder or glory, but in the quiet hands that share warmth with others. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what kindness means to you. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that faith still shines in the darkest winters. May God bless you and your family, keep your hearts warm, and guide your days with light and grace.